Minds and Rumble. I
Yeah,
download the Rumble and Minds. I download the video of Steve. I just was on with Steve Turley before you, and he kind of hit me to Minds and Rumble.
Yeah.
So Mike Shaw is with us as we do this every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. Mike, how are you?
Hey, okay. It's actually warming up here a little bit in the DC area.
Yeah. What's happening in the great swamp of DC? Do they still have the National Guard out? And I was talking about TikTok. There's this TikToker I follow who goes out every day early and he films the Capitol and the guards and the barbed wire and everything. And it looks like the green zone in Baghdad over there.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the way they like it. I mean, they want to be separated from the common man. And I suspect that those barriers will be taken down about the same time that there will be no COVID restrictions.
Yeah, okay. And when do you think that time will be?
Well, according to Tony Fauci, even if you're vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask and social distance until 2022. So
we're not going to see the end of this thing so quickly. And
they love the power. They love the power.
I think that he actually said that you still can't go to restaurants and you still can't go to gyms and whatnot. But the reality is that people are not observing that now. Yeah, I've seen restaurants are packed. I mean, nobody's paying any attention to that.
No, I mean, what happened was that, like so many of these people do, he pushed it too far. All right. Those of us that knew his history from the beginning knew that this guy was an idiot, but somehow he's played the system and was the spokesman. But it just got more and more ridiculous as the goalposts kept getting pushed more and more and more. It started out with, in January of 2020, if you recall, no problem. That's just in China, no sweat. In February 2020, no, of course you don't have to wear a mask. No need to do that. No need to worry. Then it completely went the other direction. Well, don't worry. Once we get a vaccine, everything's cool. Well, we've had a vaccine. Everything still isn't cool. So all I say to people that still drink the Kool-Aid is, if there really are over 500,000 deaths, then I wouldn't say that's a real great job that they did about handling this pandemic. If you had a coach.
Yeah, but they're blaming Trump. I mean, Fauci, I think even today he went out with a comment about that Trump had ignored the signs, and they're blaming, so that's what their answer is.
Oh, Trump ignored. Okay. Yeah. But their study came out from the CDC that found that 85% of the people who tested COVID positive were using masks and social distancing all the time. And then, of course, I may have mentioned this last week, there are people that immediately tried to debunk the study by saying, no, that's not really what it said, because it also said that the people who didn't get COVID was about the same percentage who wore masks. So they didn't realize that they'd just proven the null hypothesis, i.e., masks don't make any difference.
Yeah. So then the mask, masked or unmasked, it didn't seem to matter. The virus spread just as quickly. Likewise with the shutdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, for example, compare Sweden to likewise nations in Europe, which did complete shutdowns, they did about the same, if not worse. I mean, the most shutdown nation of all of Europe was Belgium, and they have the highest rate.
Yeah, and it's funny that the Kool-Aid drinkers never like talking about that.
Now, the other threat, if we could call it that, is this incoming virus that nobody knows about.
Right.
Nobody can recognize. There's no way of keeping track of it, and it's everywhere, and that it's going to become. Just watch. In a week, they keep saying next week, 2 weeks.
Well, what do you know about that? That we're always going to scare you. Even if we have a vaccine, it may not work for this new variant.
Mm.
So,
Although the Boston Globe even admitted today that the Johnson and Johnson vaccine does work better for all variants, and it's
yes.
actually a much better vaccine because it's only one shot.
Well, it's one shot. I don't know whether it so much works better for the variants rather than they tested it against some of the variants, which the earlier vaccines weren't. But of course, one of the other things that happened with this was that there are credible people, not that it matters at this point, questioning the whole emergency utilization authorization from FDA. And it's very technical, but one of the key points made was, as you recall, people were raising the issue some time ago that the PCR testing has too many false positives for people that might have COVID. Okay, so if you want to inflate the efficacy rate of a vaccine, then what you do is make sure that everybody you test is COVID positive, which is they use the PCR testing in the clinical trials for Pfizer, even though they should have used what's called the Sanger method, which is much more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And this point was raised by a pretty smart guy from Connecticut to the FDA, and their response was, "Well, yeah, you make a point, but tough luck." Because now they've got to CYA a lot of people, of course.
Oh, okay.
And
the CDC is now acknowledging that a lot of people who did not pass away due to the virus were listed as part of the virus.
Oh yeah,
So that's something that's out there. So they're saying we'll have to have the mask on for the rest of the year and the lockdowns.
Well, it makes no sense. If the vaccine works, that's complete nonsense.
I mean, even Massachusetts, my own home state, the director of education has just announced that school's going to be back at the end of this month.
Yeah.
Or I think at the mid next month, 5 days a week.
Right.
And that's that. So that's and there's the real hardcore, COVID people are like, well, they can't make the teachers go back unless they've been vaccinated. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I would think that would be up to the teacher.
Well, of course, the CDC has also said that you can go back to school whether you're vaccinated or not.
Sure.
Which, by the way, was a nice subtle backdoor to downplaying how great the vaccine is, by the way, because they're laying the groundwork for all this stuff. So, as I predicted late last year, when people asked me, how's this thing going to end? I said, individuals are just going to declare victory. All right. At some point, as you mentioned, at some point, people are going to stop complying with all this nonsense.
Right.
There's a famous science fiction story, I don't remember the name of it, that has to do with some, if you will, Fauci-like character telling people that suddenly the atmosphere has become contaminated and everybody has to wear these, not masks, but special helmets. So finally, one guy says, I just don't believe this. And he's at a busy street in New York or something, and he just pulls off the helmet, and he's fine. And then everybody takes off their helmets. And
like the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
And also, this is an alarming story, and I believe it was in the New York Times, and there was a couple of doctors interviewed about this, predicting that this thing is coming down the pike that's going to make COVID look like a kindergarten game. I forget they have the Nipah or something, or the Nupah coming out of I think Burma or Thailand, where I guess the government has just incinerated something like 500,000 pigs because they were the carriers of this thing, and that it's much worse than much more contagious than COVID. Could become the next worldwide epidemic and could be devastating. What do you know about that?
That's right. Well, I mean, Ebola was a big deal.
Sure.
Thank God there were only a couple of cases in the U.S. I mean, suddenly people have discovered America, so to speak, that, my God, there are these horrible pathogens out there. Well, you know what? They've always been out there.
Well, that gets to me my next question, because the environmentalists, the the kind of the Chicken Little sky is falling crowd, the henny penny,
fear entrepreneurs.
right. I mean, they're saying that all of this is because of global warming, it's overpopulation, and all the rest.
Based on what exactly?
Well, that's my question. I mean, it seems to me that it's not that anything has changed. There's always been these epidemics.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go back to the dark ages of the bubonic plague.
Yeah, and somehow the population of the world during the bubonic plague was a whole lot less than it is now. No, this is just the standard nonsense where these one-issue lunatics.
Right. I mean, they'll tie anything into that. I mean, if there's a freezing in Texas and the pipes freeze over, that's because of global warming. I'm like, hey, we could use a little global warming over there right now.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is terrible. So
it's what we call scare tactics. And let's face it, it worked for a while, but as you correctly say, people are starting to question all this just by logical assertions. We did all the masking, we did the lockdowns, and we have, if you want to believe it, the highest % death rates in the world. So I guess that didn't work too well.
Yeah, I mean,
and go to countries like India, by the way, that have 1/10 the death rate of the United States.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because they use hydroxychloroquine.
Don't say that word.
Oh, sorry.
We can't mention that word.
H.
They use the H drug.
The H drug.
As do, by the way, a lot of nations that are having low rates.
Yeah.
Let's not go there. That's forbidden. It's verboten, as I like to say.
Verboten.
Well,
speaking of verboten, the Democrats.
If we're going to get into verboten, let's be careful.
No. That was just a segue.
Okay, I'm anticipating something that is verboten.
Well, but it's not verboten with respect to YouTube.
Okay, then go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, good.
Not that we know what makes YouTube tick. I mean, they're very secretive about their quote community standards. I mean, as is TikTok, by the way, just as a quick little mention, I had one of my videos taken down on TikTok. I do a TikTok every day.
Right.
Because they said that I had violated community standards. Now, what I had done was I had reported on a certain event in New Hampshire that was widely covered by all of the New Hampshire media. It was covered in Boston on WRKO. It was perfectly apparently appropriate as a community standard in the print media and in the radio in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but apparently it was too much for TikTok. So I don't really want to talk about what it is. I only bring it up. It had to do with the election. I only bring it up because these things are very arbitrary, and it has to do with either the algorithm or someone didn't like what I had said, and they got their nose bent out of shape, and they called in a claim.
Well, what I was going to say was there's a couple of California Democrats that have petitioned the major mainstream networks to essentially censor all conservative media.
Oh yeah.
Because it's misleading. And my comment on that is that, can you imagine 10 years ago, if someone had suggested something like that, they would have been committed. Because that's
what never happened to the free speech movement.
Yeah, it's so antithetical to the American experience. If anything, it sounds a lot more like Nazi Germany. So I don't quite understand how even now the motivation for these people that how do they convince themselves this is a good thing?
Because they believe that they're right, and that they're labeling people like me as quote conspiracy theorists. Anybody that questions anything that we are told and spoon-fed by the media now, and is engaging in a conspiracy theory, and conspiracy theories are wrong. I just did a segment on this. I talked about how, first of all, there are bad conspiracy theories. If you call an entire group of people involved in a conspiracy theory, that's wrong, because that you can't have an entire ethnic or religious group.
Right.
Conspiracies involve specific people who would conspire. That's something where people get together and they plot to do something that creates either, it's either criminal conspiracy or political conspiracy to do something that is using deception and probably illegality, and to get something to happen. Happens all the time.
Of course.
And of course, I point out, and the way I want to turn the tables on people who would call me a conspiracy theorist is that, first of all, I have spent a lot of my time debunking bad conspiracy theories. But secondly, did they or didn't they not embrace probably the biggest conspiracy theory coming out of this culture in the past 5 years, which is that Donald Trump was spying for Russia? That's a conspiracy theory, right? I mean,
the problem is that the term conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA for the purpose of discrediting ideas that they didn't like.
I've heard that. Heard that. That's interesting.
So it was so therefore, if you're positing something that disagrees with me, you're a conspiracy theorist.
And we're supposed to view that as a bad thing. That if someone is called in other words, they're a kook. They put on the tin hat and
and by the way,
they believe that in Bigfoot, they'll say, or Elvis is still alive. They'll kind of they'll denigrate and mock you.
Well, and the counterpart of that in the health field is called anecdotal.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And there was some controversy by some people who really don't think about this too much about if it's ethical to give a placebo in certain clinical trials, with the point being that if I have an efficacious treatment, why am I damaging, so to speak, these other people in the trial by not giving them the treatment? And a good example would be it had to do with the treatment for psoriasis, and there was a placebo.
Mm-hmm.
And so the comment was made, well, this is stupid because you need a control. Well, here's the control. There's no such thing as spontaneous remission of psoriasis. So if I have some miracle drug that clears up your skin in 2 days, then that just didn't happen by itself. But right. the people that are fanboys of randomized clinical trial theory would argue that would be anecdotal. Similarly, if I had a product that I told you, if I put it in your gas tank, it would give you 500 miles per gallon. The obvious test would be put it in your gas tank and see if it gives you 500 miles per gallon, with the logical premise being that otherwise cars don't get 500 miles per gallon. All right. A randomized clinical trial fanboy, however, would say, no, you have to have the solution minus the active ingredient as the control, which is nonsense. And that's just one of the problems with people not understanding the scientific method and becoming this ridiculous orthodoxy into the structure of these things. And similarly, where it came out in COVID was, I promise you, I could have cured 15,000 people of COVID-19 with one of these drugs we can't mention, but it would still be regarded as anecdotal.
Anecdotal, yeah, of course. Those are anecdotes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the broader conspiracy view. And, again, I would contend that the two great conspiracy schools of the recent centuries are communism and Nazism, right? It's based on an entirely conspiratorial view of mankind and of society. And that this idea that, certain people are literally oppressing other people by just the fact that they exist.
Yes.
That the new conspiratorial worldview is the environmental view, that somehow, and this isn't even a question of whether or not global warming is happening, whether or not global warming is to a degree man-made. I think it probably is. But this idea of impending doom and emergency, and it allows every average person who embraces this conspiratorial mindset to suddenly become a scientist. We're all walking scientists. There's a cold snap in Texas. Oh, it's global warming. Really? Do they have any statistics on that? Is there any data on that? I mean, is there any scientific thinking on this? Oh, then that's what the scientists are saying. Really? Who? I'd like a name. I mean, in other words, everything that happens now in the environment can be chalked up. And this is by people, in the media. I've seen this with, with anchors, news reporters. Oh, due to global warming. They don't have any proof. Everyone thinks they're a scientist now.
But you
because
have
they've been
to be
raised-
very careful. You have to be very careful when you attribute everything in the world to one cause.
Yes.
And there are people that do this, and they're in danger. Well, and they become kooks, which happens, by the way, to a lot of well-meaning people, including a very good friend of mine, who's a successful doctor in LA, who's actually cured a number of autistic kids. But he got so hung up on his viewpoint, which is fundamentally correct, but the trouble is it doesn't, the viral load in your blood does not cause every condition known to man.
Right.
Although he can make a reasonably good argument for that. But the point is that unfortunately, there is no single unified theory of everything. And once you start attributing everything to this particular cause, it's just going to fall apart. And of course,
right. And also, it's a very simplistic way of looking at the world. Everything is, and by the way, I'd say this for people on the right as well. I mean, it's sort of like if you start thinking that everything is the, conspiracy on the part of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, right? That they're secretly. I mean, it's not. It's very simplistic. It gets into like this kind of mindset where you can explain everything about life through this prism, including your own personal problems.
That's right.
With Nazism, it was the Jews. With the communism, it's the bourgeois. It's the wealthy people. It's the anyone who's not politically correct, however they define it at any given time. And that you start to define everything in those terms. And yeah, it could be embraced by very intelligent people. I mean, Leon Trotsky was a very intelligent man, but he was also completely warped by this view of everything fitting into this neat kind of sieve. So, I bring this up because, maybe I was triggered, if you will, by
not you.
by a comment that I heard this morning on Jeff Kuhner's program.
By the way, should you give out the phone number?
Yeah, why not? But the guy said, conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? All right. Anyway, yeah, let's give out the phone number. If you'd like to join the conversation, we take phone calls. This is live right here. And it's amazing. We can do this just like you do in any conventional radio show. 617-396-4958. That number again, 617-396-4958. You can call that number and be live. Keep community standards in mind here. I had a live call that led to my being suspended on TikTok because it used the N-word, which, don't do. And I don't have ability to screen, by the way.
Yeah. Now, what about this conspiracy thing?
So where was I? Oh, somebody's like, you people are all a bunch of conspiracy nuts. I don't know. What was I saying about that? I was my train of thought.
No, you were talking to somebody about it.
Yeah, no, I was listening to somebody make a comment on Jeff Kuhner's show.
Oh, okay.
And it led me to think about this today. I mean, I've tried to debunk bad conspiracy theories, but at the same time, conspiracies happen all the time.
Yeah.
You have to, I actually think that there should be a science of conspiracy theory. Just like we have sociology, we have anthropology, we have statistics, we have economics. We should have a college discipline called conspiracy theory.
Or conspiracyology.
Conspiracyology, yeah. And you should get a degree in it. It should be a college discipline where you study what is and isn't conspiracy, and you investigate it honestly and dispassionately, and using evidence and reason and all of the various tools that we have to really look at conspiracy and what is and what isn't, including the grand conspiracies of history, like with the Knights Templar and the Illuminati and all of that. These things, rather than throwing fingers at each other and poking each other in the eyes and saying, oh, we have to get serious about actually understanding the nature of conspiracy. That way, if there is a conspiracy, it can be exposed and discussed in the open. And there may be some things about it that are good, and we can embrace those. Like, for example, there was a conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler, right?
There were several, I think. 5.
Yeah, that's right. The Van Stauffenberg.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a good conspiracy. It would have stopped this evil maniac.
Well, it would have been a better conspiracy that it worked.
Right. It would have shortened World War II. I mean, I'm not saying that all conspiracies are bad. I mean, the founding fathers, the Tea Party in Boston was hatched in a secret society called what was it?
Sons of Liberty.
Yeah, Sons of Liberty actually met at this tavern that's still there in Boston. It's right in the City Hall. That's a good conspiracy. They figured we're going to board the ship. We're going to put on Indian garb. And, it led to, I'm saying that, it's not that conspiracies are necessarily bad, but we need to get serious about investigating them, identifying them, evaluating them, summarizing them, and interpreting them, just like we do with any other social science.
Well, what about if there are conspiracies that exist, but don't have such the influence that some people would tend to promote?
Then fine. I mean, yeah. What do you mean?
Well, okay, you talk about the Illuminati and so on.
Sure.
The Illuminati did exist.
Yeah.
As far as I understand it, that movement doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
But there are people that are attributing some things to it.
There is.
Yeah.
It should be investigated. That's particularly a very popular one, by the way, in the African American community. They are into the Illuminati. I mean, I've seen this online. I don't have my evidence on it is anecdotal, but nevertheless, there's concern that this thing is still happening. It's still out there. You go to, basically the further right or left you go, you find that. I say, fine, let's have a serious, open discussion about it. Let's have, rather than, debunking, personally, I don't believe that the Illuminati literally is still around, but I think that their ideas are. We should study that.
Oh, yeah.
What they represented was something that's well known, and it's certainly more well known in Europe than it is in the United States, where here we denigrate that. Europe, that's part of the conventional history of Europe. They don't, they don't make any bones about it. Winston Churchill included it in his history book. It's not something that people in any way dismiss. But, so we need to understand what that was, what they believed in. And yeah, why not have a study of whether or not it's still here? Why not make that case? Is there something so horrible about looking at secret societies?
Well, no, I mean, the reason that people don't want to do that, of course, is it becomes a convenient epithet to throw on the other side. Nelson Rockefeller was famous for pandering to his people how bad the John Birch Society is.
Right.
But he never really discussed what their premises were.
What they were bringing up, which was his establishment of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations. Look, these are secret societies. I'm sorry, but they are. The CIA is a secret society. They do stuff in secret, and we ought to open the door and say, hey, you have a huge degree of influence in this country and in this world and in this society. What are you about? Masonry is a secret society. I'm not saying it's all bad. I mean, George Washington was a Mason. Washington, the city of Washington, D.C. was plotted on Masonic lines. I mean, I think there's a lot of very good, valuable things there, but we still ought to know about it. We ought to open the door and find out what do they do in there.
Well,
I'm
some
sorry,
of the appeal of these organizations is that they are secret. So you too can join and you'll get
a part of this exciting. Yeah, I mean, you go through a ritual and there's initiation. Fine, all right, but nevertheless, I mean, and everything has look, secretiveness is part of ownership. I mean,
Right.
you don't know what's going. We don't know the secret formula to Coca-Cola, right? I mean, or
Yeah.
we don't get privy to the board meeting in a major corporation. That's secretive, right? I get that. You need that.
So
You
it could
know,
be a conspiracy.
it could be, but there is a certain degree that's necessary, I suppose, in order for you to think things through that you don't necessarily decide to do. There has to be a certain confidentiality,
Right.
right? There's the secretive relationship, the confidentiality in a marriage, or in a lawyer-client, or for that matter, a priest in confession. That's a secret communication. You're not supposed to reveal. I get that. That's fine. That's part of freedom. But it's institutionalized after a while, and I think we need to open the lid rather than criticize.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the first thing they could do is just pick, and somebody could do a TV series on this.
They already it's a popular cottage industry, right?
Yeah, so pick a particular conspiracy and really delve into it.
You bet. There was a young woman who did amazing. I forget her name now, but she wrote a fantastic book while she was a student at Yale about Skull and Bones.
Well, they made a movie called The Skulls, of course.
I don't know if that was based on her book, but she did a great job by doing a little sleuthing over there and getting to the bottom of it. Look, Alex Jones, I know that he's not well liked and he's been purged, and he's been involved with some very wrong things, very bad things, and he was sued for one of them and should have been. That's how you handle that, by the way. Somebody's wrong, rather than simply have them, deleted. There's a system, but the point is that he did a good job of infiltrating the Bohemian Grove back in the 1990s, I think. Literally, with him and another guy going in there with cameras and filming this thing.
That's right.
That's what we should do. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, what they're doing in there was pretty weird. And what the hell? And you had high-level people in government and in corporations, most of them, by the way, leaning Republican.
Yeah.
Who were involved with some of that stuff. And we should know.
There were more rhino types, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, sure. John McCain, I don't know. Nixon once went and he came back and he said, this was rather queer, he said.
Not sure how he meant that, but okay.
He probably meant it in various ways. Yeah. The point is that we should know about it because these are people who hold positions of influence. We should know what they're up to. This is the criticism of the QAnon. Let's not go too far into that. And I don't claim to know about it. I never liked the fact that nobody signed their name to it. So I didn't trust it, because.
Well, that was the first concern.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I need to know who, and I need to know, what they're about. And if somebody's just sending off anonymous stuff online, I don't trust that by nature. Who knows who's behind it? But having said that, they did bring up some interesting things about international pedophile rings and satanic practices.
Oh, yeah.
To me, that, rather than throwing this is a nutty conspiracy. Why not have that looked into? Why not have an investigation? If we had like a conspiracy department at a college, you could have a team of people really do research. Is there is this going on? I think we should know.
Well, there could be ways to certify a conspiracy.
That's right.
Through standardized tests. In terms of the international pedophile thing, unfortunately, I would tend to believe a lot of it because
me too.
With the background in the entertainment industry, there's absolutely no question that that's been going on since the beginning of Hollywood. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not that uncommon.
And there are people who would have a great motivation to cover it up.
Yeah.
And they've got careers, they've got wealth, they've got reputation, they've got power. And, these kinds of corruptions become sort of systemic in an organization that does have that kind of influence.
Right.
And sort of this is why we have like a free press and a free speech. We're supposed to investigate power. If you have power like that operates with impunity, after a while, They're going to get into some corrupt practices, and they're going to be denying it even to themselves because they begin to live in a parallel universe. They're functioning on their own set of laws, their own set of values, and their own code of omerta, their own cover-up.
Well, unfortunately, there is no investigative journalism anymore.
Right.
In fact, there was an article by Bill Gertz in the Washington Times today, who had some pretty conclusive proof that the SARS-CoV-2 came from Wuhan lab. And of course, this was.
And he's done some very good work over
course.
decades on China.
Yeah. So of course, this was debunked, quote unquote, by the usual suspects. And then finally, USA Today and others had to admit, well, it actually is mostly true. They never said what wasn't true. But so I was exposed to so-called investigative journalism involving certain chemicals, and it was complete garbage. There were two women some years ago doing something on endocrine disruptors, as they called them, and they used one source. And I finally called the lead writer and I said, do you realize that the one guy you talk to is considered kind of a lunatic in the biological sciences? Did it ever occur to you to talk to anyone else? And she just got her back up. Well, we're doing our thing and that's it.
Right.
So there's really no investigation. It's more promotion of a certain predetermined point of view. And that's too bad. But I think that's what it's come down to.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what what a lot of science has come down to?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I didn't realize this. So the first inkling I got of this actually was when I wrote an article, it must have been probably 15 years ago, almost innocently questioning or bringing up the fact that the theory of evolution is just that, a theory. It's not fact. It's not proven. It's not hard science.
Yeah.
I didn't even at the time consider that it wasn't true. I mean, this is back like 1999, 2000, around that time. And the amount of hate mail that I was getting from all sides was, I'd never seen anything like it. People took it very personally. How could I question this?
Well, there's hate mail because fundamentally, as you say, it's a theory. It can't be proven.
Right.
And indeed, there's several examples of how it probably isn't true.
Right.
Such as the structure of the human eye.
Right.
There's no possible way that could have evolved, but it doesn't matter. And I say that to your viewers because it's so complex. There are so many steps in the process of sight that it's absolutely inconceivable that there could have been intermediate stages of this that could have somehow developed into this massively complex functionality.
Right. And obviously what they ultimately, at the end of the day, they cannot explain what happens when something that does not see suddenly sees.
Yes.
It was like a moment there that it cannot be scientifically quantified. It's like what actually causes vision and what exactly is that? We know we could talk about the anatomy of it and the biology, but you cannot actually get down to what happens, what it is. And the fact that I was attacked so vigorously for this, including when I ran for Congress, when Barney Frank on television in Boston turned to the audience and he said, Charles Moscowitz doesn't believe in the theory of evolution. And that was the only moment that I saw during that whole campaign that he looked visibly angry. I mean, I brought up the fact that he had, diluted immigration laws to allow the 9/11 terrorists to come in the country legally, something that he didn't even disagree with, and that nobody, I had huge evidence of that. Nothing, no problem. But this thing really got under his skin. He was really mad. It's such a basic belief on the part of the establishment. And what it made me realize is that how political science is. I mean, if it's just a theory, then why, if it's true, then why are they so like circling the wagons? And that experience, which also led me to write a book, it was my first book called The Apostles of Evolution. I look at the politics of it. That has led me to think about the way science is now, the way global warming is, the way the pandemic is, the way cancer research is. We can look at various areas. It's all become politicized. It has all become a matter of who gets the grant money, why they're giving the money. There is a political side to it. There is a political agenda associated with it. It's not what I always idealistically thought science was, which is simply a search for the truth. People who understand how to do this go about doing evidence and looking at evidence and using a microscope. My father was a doctor. I understood that. I went to his office. He was a veterinarian, and he showed me how to look under a microscope at various, germs and whatnot. And I really admired that. I still do. But that's what I thought science was: looking at evidence, getting to the truth,
I think
and compiling that evidence so you could come up with a new thesis. And then
it was a one.
Well, right. I mean, but what happened? I mean, I think that Darwin was the first nose out of the tent. The pushing of that theory back in 1860.
Well, the thing
that's when
rose the success of Darwin's theory was it gave polite people a reason to be atheist. And
atheist, and also, I mean, it did, and it scientized racism.
Yeah,
it accomplished a lot of political agendas. It scientized socialism, because then you could have
for sure
a greater
yeah,
because you had like an elite that was more evolved,
right,
that would steward over the rest of us and try to evolve mankind, and in the process winnow away and get rid of those who are not going to make the cut. What Darwin actually in one of the editions of his book called The Survival of the Fittest. It became a science idea. And it led to first of all, Karl Marx loved Darwin. He was a contemporary. He wanted to dedicate Capital to Darwin, and Darwin refused. He said, because I'm not an economist, I don't really want to be on that. But there's still a copy of that book in the Darwin House Museum in London that shows Marx's copy sent to him with a letter and with an inscription. So, I mean, Marx totally embraced this idea of evolution, except he took it from the biological theory to a social theory. This idea that man is going through these different stages where they're becoming more perfect. And in the process, you have to get rid of the people that aren't with the program until you reach the utopia, the ultimate evolution, communism. Anyway.
Well, where science became politicized was maybe even slightly before that, although almost contemporary, when there were two theories of medicine battling out between the allopathic and homeopathic. Obviously, the dominant theory now is allopathic for various reasons, but it became clear that what was involved here was money, because
they can't make money off the homeopathic medicine.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it exists in nature.
Yeah, notwithstanding the fact that much of that doesn't really work, but the thing was that you had to embrace a certain type of science that was going to be better for the mainstream, or at least for the orthodoxy. And this continued. The favorite example that I use, and this is years ago, during the 60s, it was somewhat of a status thing, I guess, when these Madison Avenue executives would all have ulcers. And of course, there were people promoting the idea even then that ulcers were actually caused by bacterial infection. But that was contrary to the orthodoxy, which suggested that, in essence, the reason you have an ulcer is because your body does not have enough Tagamet in it. So that was the number one drug for many years. And people were taking this Tagamet to treat their ulcer, which only dealt with some of the symptoms. But then finally, there was incontrovertible evidence that Helicobacter pylori was the primary cause of ulcers. Still, it took 15 years for mainstream medicine to accept that. Although, I mean, admittedly, some doctors always believed it, but there was such an influence of big pharma, but not even big pharma. The fact that we've established this orthodoxy, and how dare you contradict it. This also applied, although this has been really swept away, the history of AIDS. There were many people that questioned the HIV theory.
Sure.
And including the late Corey Mullis, by the way, who was a Nobel Prize winner. And he came onto that very innocently. He was writing a grant that was going to go into using some of his perfected DNA and RNA techniques for studying human immunodeficiency virus. Okay, so when you write grants, you footnote things, as anybody who's written a report knows. So the opening paragraph was something to the effect that since it's well established that HIV causes AIDS, now he looks for a footnote for that. He couldn't find any reference. And then he took this on as a challenge. And he went to Luc Montagnier, who supposedly was the discoverer of this virus. And he was at a conference that was coming up the next week. Well, this is a great opportunity. He'll certainly know the reference. He didn't have one.
Oh.
So it became clear to Mullis that this was just an accepted axiom of the field, and that was that.
And nobody really took the time to think about where it stopped?
No. I mean, it was convenient for the way things were progressing in that field. And of course, that was Tony Fauci's major bad accomplishment.
Well, his thing was promoting AZT, right?
Promoting AZT, which ended up killing the patients.
It killed more people than AIDS in the country.
Yeah. And I always make the point, and no one seems to care, that for doing something that horrific, I mean, let's be honest, the guy was rewarded with a big career at NIH.
Talk about a politicized scientist.
Oh, God.
Right? I mean, this is, he's a politician.
No, there's no question about it. I mean, he has to be a politician because he's a terrible doctor.
Right. So, he hasn't practiced medicine in decades.
Well, he never did.
Probably not.
He went directly from residency into NIH.
That's like, who's it? The guy, the science guy on television. Bill Nye. He doesn't have even a degree in science. I mean,
it's a bachelor's in engineering.
Yeah, that's right. So all of a sudden he
doesn't really know any science, but
and he's held up as the nation's expert on for young people. They all look to him.
Yeah, well, it's just marketing.
Right, it's marketing, and it's, in a sense, it's politicizing of science, which is what we're talking about. I mean, what happened to Tagamet anyways? Was it taken off the market?
Well, when you use the term taken off the market,
or did they repackage it?
The drug was harmful or something. No, it fell out of favor.
Okay.
It's probably still available.
It didn't do major harm then. It just
it ended up treating some of the symptoms of having an ulcer.
Okay.
But clearly it avoided what was actually causing the problem. And I'm not that I'm picking on Tagamet.
No, I understand.
That there was orthodoxy.
Any of these drugs, and I'm not against use of drugs. It's critical, especially if you have, but they have side effects that are often listed in very, very fine print. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, years ago, I had acid reflux that was affecting my ability to speak on the radio, and I was really struggling with that. And I went to my hospital here in Boston, and they gave me a prescription. And it kind of worked. It sort of took care of some of it.
Yeah.
And I took it for probably the better part of 6 months.
Mhm.
but there was something that just didn't feel good. I wasn't feeling right. I was wondering. So finally, I got off my duff and I decided to read the fine print, which I had not done. And I was horrified to find out some of the side effects of this drug. It was very bad. I mean, it does a number on your bones. I mean, it's just
Oh, yeah.
not good stuff. And so I looked for a kind of a more natural remedy, an alternative remedy. And at the time, I discovered Joe Barton's newsletter, who's a pretty good guy.
Hmm.
He talks about food you buy at a grocery store as a way of dealing with various diseases that cost nothing more than they cost. And for acid reflux, he said, an apple. It's that simple. Have an apple. And if you have
An apple a
serious,
day.
an apple a day. And if you have a bigger problem and you really need to overcome it, a couple of teaspoons of apple cider vinegar, and also raw honey in tea, not regular honey, but unprocessed raw honey.
All of which, by the way, are recommended by several conventional doctors.
Yeah, and it works. Not perfectly, but I'm
But
able
it doesn't
to
have the
control.
side effects of the
No,
proton pump
no
inhibitor.
side effects. It's the stuff you would eat apples anyways. It's
Yeah.
normal food you get, doesn't cost any more. And if I'm feeling a little acid reflux, I'll have an apple and I'm fine. It
Yeah.
absorbs the acid and it works. The point I'm making is that it's not that I'm against the use of prescriptions, but the wise consumer has to look at all the alternatives. I mean, I think that the healthcare industry and they also are crazy in a way. They make huge claims, this is going to cure, both sides are very proprietous about their particular disciplines. And it's the wise consumer that picks a little from each side and uses conventional medicine mixed with alternative medicines. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is alternative medicine becomes an unfortunate name because
Right.
if
That's
anything works, it should be medicine.
It's medicine. Exactly.
Alternative.
And obviously the drug company's not going to make any money from an apple.
Yeah.
But they're going to make a ton of money from this. By the way, there's one of these acid reflux drugs has been pulled off the market. There's a class action suit over that.
Yeah.
So I feel somewhat vindicated by not going that route.
Well, you have to use common sense. I mean, there are proposed quote unquote natural remedies for diabetes. I don't believe they work.
Right.
Other than one natural remedy is if you weigh 350 pounds, lose weight.
That's probably the most natural remedy that nobody wants to do. But
well, speaking of weight for a minute, there was a story which your viewers might appreciate. It came out of the UK that they're really hardcore into getting people vaccinated. So they've set up priority lists. And anyway, this guy a couple of weeks ago, 32-year-old guy in good health, is at the top of a priority list. And he can't figure out why. So he finds out that the reason he was put so high on the list was that where he put his height at 6'2", they interpreted that as 6.2 centimeters, which is about 3 inches. So
I see. So then the weight proportion.
Yeah. So he weighed about 200 pounds. So his BMI was calculated at somewhere around 29,000.
I see.
So he had this horrible, massively obese 3-inch guy that weighed so many.
Right. I get it. Sure.
And that was cleared up, but it was not before it was covered in the BBC.
Yeah. Well, all right. And not to get into a rather unpleasant subject, and I want to be careful here since we're reaching the end, but we talked last time about some anecdotal evidence around the vaccines that did not look great. Has there been anything? And I think that one of the things that you talked about, apparently there's been major pushback on that.
Okay, well, if you go to the actual printed information sheet from Pfizer, they say that there's insufficient evidence to recommend the vaccine being taken by pregnant women.
Okay.
As to safe and effective. well, effective as well, to be safe. They
Hmm.
don't have the data. They
Okay.
also don't have the data on lactating women.
Okay.
Okay, there was major pushback on the case of the pregnant woman that miscarried
Hmm.
who took the vaccine.
Right.
But the point had been made that targeting the spike protein is dangerously similar to placenta proteins, and it was never tested. I mean, bottom line, it was never tested. And I got into a big email debate with someone who said, no, you're wrong. And they produced a paper, which was completely irrelevant, but they somehow thought it mattered. So that question has been raised. And here your use of anecdotal is very interesting because there's no way of proving it one way or the other than anecdotes, because you're surely not going to hire Joseph Mengele to take a group of pregnant women and decide which chemicals he's going to give them to see what's going to promote a miscarriage.
Sure.
So it's going to be by observation. But my only point in this is that they're not publicizing any of this.
And they're debunking and attacking anybody that tries to.
Yeah, but which is wrong, because if God forbid you do miscarry, that's going to be very interesting data to report. Did I take the vaccine and so on and so forth? But they're not at all worried about compiling this, which to me speaks volumes.
It does. It does. All right, Mike. So listen, what's your latest article?
Well, the one that's on the streets now actually dealt with some of this vaccine stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I may veer away from COVID for the upcoming piece because it's really dangerous to keep covering the same thing. Because then, I become guilty of what I accuse others of, that you're just obsessed with a certain topic. Or I guess if I am going to cover it, it's the idea that, as you raised at the beginning of the show, people are now throwing off the shackles here. And even in Massachusetts, apparently they're going to restaurants.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I would think would be ground zero for all the true believers. But
you would, and they're still out there. But yeah, in fact, my own doctor, I had like my annual physical, and she's kind of thinks like I do. She's a skeptic.
Yeah.
She says that she's afraid that some of her patients are never going to take off the mask, even after it's over. She's afraid.
Yeah.
That they're just so. It's become like a religion.
Well, what Diane Kress told me, who's a nutrition writer that I'm friends with, she had to go visit her daughter in New Jersey, or she lives in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And she said the weirdest thing was getting on the airplane, not that she was so much worried about it, but the fact that now you're sitting in such close proximity with all these people, which you haven't done for over a year.
That's
it just feels weird.
Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, some people are they have trouble coming out. Really locked into this thing.
Yeah, I'm surprised you're not wearing your mask during this broadcast.
I know, really. Yeah,
but I'll let it go.
Oh, okay. I hope I don't get in trouble. All right, Mike. So listen, Michael Shaw, I'll talk to you soon. We'll get together next week at the usual time.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you